Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of All Things God and Country. I am your host, Justin Clearwater, and this is my co-host, Jacob Kitson. And today we are welcoming back a good friend and our guest, Gary Wayne. Yeah, dogs are barking.
Yes. And it's been a long hiatus. We haven't done a podcast.
It's been a minute. As
And
you can see, you probably can't notice, but we are in a new room,
and
and it's much bigger. We don't have to be that close now,
yes,
so it's a wonderful.
it's adjusting.
And it's been slapped together very quickly for this few technical issues. But we're glad to have Gary with us. It's glad to have you here. Gary, you have become a hot topic of conversation as of lately on X and podcast circles. And oddly enough, not for what you would think. You'd think people would be talking about Nephilim or something when it comes to Gary Wayne, but it seems to be you poke the bear, or the maybe the golden cow is a better reference, with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And so I thought that would be a good place to dig into, since it's topical of our time
Yeah.
right now, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and Lewis is looked at, specifically Lewis is looked at such as a apologeticist and for Christianity in a lot of ways, with books that a lot of
Mere Christianity,
yeah,
Screwtape Letter.
letters of all of those are wonderful works that are utilized in by some for the defense of the faith. So I will be interested to see how that is mentioned, because he does come from an odd background when you look into the man, and then his high church
It gets
and
weirder.
everything. It does when
Yeah.
you start uncovering, and I mean, nobody knows how to dig like Gary. So with that, sir,
Get your shovels.
that's right.
I
We're
stole that
ready.
from The Undertaker.
Did you? We're ready for you, sir, and we've really anticipated that. And for all of those who don't know, Gary Wayne is the author of not one but two books detailing the Genesis 6 conspiracy. He's been an author and
And a new book, a third book on the way.
yes,
We
April
will
1st.
talk to that. April 1st. Reserve it
Yeah.
now. Pre-order.
He describes himself as a contrarian who goes against the grain of Christian thoughts and
I already
behavior.
saw it listed on Amazon. It's ready for pre-order. Got to do it.
Get your plug in.
Pre-order the book.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's a
called
little
the
shorter.
Yes.
it's called the Aprimo Conspiracy: AI's Covenant with Babylon. So it's designed to sort of display a lot of my research in the characters, locations, organizations, but also to lay down for people how the end time might come about, and based on my eschatology. And so looking to get the end time in a little bit more mainstream and a little bit more take a back step. Let's have a look at how this world really works so that you can sort of understand some of the things that might be, coming about. And, we have got these things like people are going to say, well, this new table that Trump is putting together is, the end time empire. Of course, we haven't got the universal religion yet, but so we have an organization that we put together in terms of how this might sort of come together in the book, called the GAC, as we came. It's kind of generic, but it means, the Global Alliance Coalition of 10 Empires. And so as we sort of approach the end time, they're starting to come together, and they're going to form that sort of 10 King Empire. So it's things like that in terms of how we take it back to the Bible. We take it back to how we can look at things today, and then that we need to understand that nothing is new under the sun, and what was will be again, and start linking it in, and hopefully making it a intriguing, interesting, turn the page type of narrative, which is why I have a co-author who writes novels, a publisher. So we've been working on that, and we've already started on a sequel with the hopes that this is going to go over pretty well. With the testing that's been done, it looks like it might go over quite well. So we're getting ready for the sequel. So we get only to about, because if, and what people don't understand and why they sort of get confused is there's so many things that are going on. It's not just one little thing. There's just a whole plethora. So you have to set the table for what's going on in the whole world, and work in different aspects, because they're all going to be working together as those last 7 years. We get to the opening of the first three seals and sort of the introducing of what the fourth seal is. And that gets to 300 pages pretty quick. So that's how much table setting. And the other thing that we're taking on there is that It's interesting how the Book of Revelation has the throne scenes, and then you get the sequence of events afterwards. But how does that message get to the earth? And we're not really told that. Obviously, once you get into the last 7 years, you're going to have 144,000 people from the tribe of Israel. You're going to have the two witnesses. But how does that sort of play? Because that takes time to unfold as well. And all of this is going on before and during. So we come up with a way to how to get that message sort of downstream into the world, and then how the world reacts to those messages. And then how does AI play in all of this, which is what Bill wanted to really sort of get working in the novel is AI is going to have a large imprint. So what would that look like? So we're paying close attention to technology as well.
Right on. So for all of us, 30 and up kids who read the Left Behind series, where does this rank against that as far as
Well, I don't know whether anybody can come close to touching what they did in terms of success.
well, I mean,
Let's go with
But that
accuracy.
aside, I think what we're going to get into is everything they don't.
that's what I meant.
Mm.
Which is
So,
great. And so we're
yeah.
looking forward to that. And
So sounds like it could easily turn into maybe a movie.
yeah.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, who
Cool.
knows? I mean, it's whether or not people like the story and that they accept it. So you know that you're going up against the headwinds when you're doing this type of
Oh yeah.
topic. And then within Christianity, you're going against the headwinds because there's a lot of discrimination within Christianity that if you don't go to the standard dogma of the hegemony, you get sort of blacklisted or avoided and all sorts of things like that. And as a contrarian, that just means your information and your story in this case has to be more compelling to break through all of that. So that's what we're hoping it's going to do.
We will
Yeah,
get probably
and the picture
day of.
on the book has a image of one of the main characters named Beck, and she's got, just to give people a bit of an understanding, that we give her a background as an ancient bloodline back to the ancient Basques. So
Nice.
just as a, and the outfit that she's wearing, she's not part of a cult or anything like that, but she's intimately part in the opening of the seals in terms of how that gets to the earth. She doesn't open the seals, but she's active in terms of how that information is going to get out. And she has to go from place to place in secrecy because she's being hunted by the world hegemony, who doesn't want that message to come out or control it in a way that they'll change the meaning or replace the message of the opening of the seals. So there's all that sort of intrigue, which now you have secret societies and secret orders and you get the rise of the hegemony of the 10 kings. You're also getting Babylon rising.
So it's like Left Behind and Brad Meltzer kind of.
It's like Left Behind, but we're not, because we're here
Right.
for it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I love that. Still
Tongue
here.
in cheek.
Is that still here?
We're still here.
I see you have 3 Genesis 6 behind you. Is one of those a different print, or because I have the original one, and what is the gray one? Is that also
So the gray one is book 2. The brown one is book 1.
right? What's the creme one then? Is that there's a cream colored one
I think that might just be the color.
Is that just the color of it in
Yeah.
our camera? Maybe.
I think those are the same.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just
and
wondering. I said, is he working on another book that he?
Well, we did a cover change in book 2 just before release. It was sort of a goldish color.
That's the one I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I think.
And we wanted to have it a little, I mean, I really like the gold one, but the idea was it looked maybe a little bit too close to the first cover. And we wanted to make sure everybody knew there were different books. So that was.
Well, I was just making sure I didn't need to buy another one. That was all.
Well, I'll make sure I get another one out. So.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
I can't wait.
And neither can I.
First.
I'm very excited, and that's kind of a little tongue in cheek in itself.
It's on Amazon. Pre-order. Is it on your website too?
It is, and you can pre-order on the website, and you can bundle with the first 2 books if you want to be able to sort of say, okay, what's he talking about, and dig into books 1 and book 2, or a lot of information that's going to be talked about in there is it's based from from those two books. So we'll see how that sort of bundles together. And when we look at getting that book out for publication, then comes the Audible and the digital. So the digital typically comes out right behind it, because once you've signed off on the typeset, then it goes to Kindle and they do their own typesetting and put it out for about the same time. And then the Audible usually takes a little bit longer to come out, because you have to hire people, readers, and just the whole process of the audio production.
Oh, you didn't read it?
No, I didn't do book 1 or book 2 either, so don't have time.
Oh, man.
The guy for book 2.
I have them on Audible. And
I know.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still going through.
Yeah, I know.
But I think that's a great idea, having the bundle with your new book, because then the fiction book is really backed by these years of researched books. So, I mean, really, you get, like, if you really want to dig into the lore of this book you have coming out, the first 2 is a great launching pad to really get there.
Well,
really want to dive
So,
in.
and it's a good launch into what we're going to talk about, because if you look at the mythopoetic style, or the typical polytheist style down through history, through the classics, is that they mix in their belief system, as in their religion, they mix in their history, and they mix in their genealogies within those stories.
Absolutely. All of them do.
And they do it in ways through allegories, through locations, symbols, and people don't know that that's what they're reading, because it's designed only for the adepts of polytheism to understand what is really being meant from that. So when you go into any of the arts, whether it's going to look at a painting, and people are saying we're trying to get the meaning and the feeling, well, the meaning and the feeling is the pablum. The art is about what it's really translating to the adepts, because they sponsor the arts. So it's about them, not about us. It's how they do things in sort of plain sight. So, like you look at like Da Vinci's Last Supper. Well, he's got those 3 triptych architecture with different dimensions seemingly in each of those windows in behind, let alone everything else that's going on in there. And there's no grail on the table. There's no chalice on the table at the Last Supper. And, you've got John looking like more female than male.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're saying, no, that's Mary Magdalene. And the V between them is the symbol of the Grail. It's of the Grail bloodline. And it's just that's how they do things. And they do it using our belief system, and in this case, Christianity, as sort of the veneer, but what's at the core, you have to be able to see into. And you see into that because of the language and of the imagery, everything that's taciturn that's in there, the allegories, the names. That's what brings out the real story. And so when polytheists look at the Bible, they look at the Bible as a fairy tale. We've all heard this, right? And they're not saying it the way you think it means. A fairy tale is a story where you have a happily ever after ending, and it is a very interesting sort of narrative. But that's not the meaning of the story. It's just the glitz and the sort of the vessel to carry all of this other information that's in there. So you have to understand the allegories, you have to understand the names, you have to understand the genealogies, you have to understand the symbols for the religion, to pull out the whole meaning. So what they say is, if you read the Bible, that's the superficial tale, but you have to be an adept of polytheism to understand what all of those locations, names, allegories really mean. And you only learn that if you're going to become a polytheist and become an adept, because you're only going to get pablum again below adept level, whether it's 32nd degree Scottish Rite or 2nd degree York Rite. That's not adept level. You have to be 3rd degree York or 33rd degree to start getting into the real meanings. And so what Tolkien and Lewis did, they created something that they really like to focus on in their writings is the eucatastrophe, which is the happily ever after ending. And their definition, this is their definition and their invention, is not mine. They said that eucatastrophe is to save the reader from the horrible feelings and understanding that the hero meets a tragic end. So you rewrite that tragic end into a happily ever after ending. And because polytheists will accept Jesus as a prophet and a teacher, but not as deity status or the word of God or the Jehovah of Elohim, then he doesn't rise after dying. That's the eucatastrophe part, to give people a good feeling. And so they adopt him in as somebody like Confucius, as somebody like Muhammad, as somebody like Buddha, but not as who he says he is. That's not their belief system. So that's the style of writing that Tolkien and Lucas did. Tolkien and Lewis did. And that this is based on an older tradition. And they were part of a writing society called the Inkling Society. And the Inkling Society is like, and I'll come back to the Inklings a little bit more in a minute, is like the Knights of the Helmet Society and the Spear Shaker Society that Francis Bacon organized to develop the English language and had writers like Shakespeare. And if you think Spear Shaker and Shakespeare are somehow related, probably. And if you wonder where that allegory comes from two Greek gods, Apollo and Athena, who held the spear as a weapon of the gods, and when they shook it, it could do magical, powerful things. But they're also supporter of the arts. So he's writing and these writers are writing to develop the English language. And of course, Shakespeare is very much like mythopoetic. It's like the same classics that come out of Rome, like with Ovides or Hesiod or Homer. It's the same sort of style that they've passed down. So this Inkling Society, and by the way, Francis Bacon was a Rosicrucian, which is kind of key. And so the Inkling Society is a writing society at Oxford. And this is in the 20s and the 30s when Tolkien and Lewis are there. And at that time, I mean, it's not that long ago, but it is almost a
Century.
different era that poor and the middle class, as we understood them, they would never be allowed into Oxford. So what are they doing there? Right? And now they're joining a Rosicrucian society, the Inkling Society. Well, Rosicrucians are higher than a Freemasonic adept and higher than an Illuminati adept. So this is getting, halfway up that thelemic tree of the secret society orders. And that A, you wouldn't have the money. B, they would never accept you at Oxford. C, they weren't there to learn about these types of topics. They were there to only learn the craft because both have bloodlines that go back to royals.
Really?
I did not know that.
Yes. And Lewis, like I believe he's actually his grandfather is, if I've got the spacing right, his grandfather or great grandfather, but I believe it's the grandfather, was the illegitimate son of the king of England.
Mm.
Yes, they moved to Ireland. He moves back, and Lewis goes back to the bloodlines of the old kings of Llewellyn,
Which makes sense when you look at the mythos figure he ties in as Aslan, going back to what you're talking about, like even in the embodiment of like the emblem of English power into his narrative.
Yeah, the lion. Yeah, and Aslan was an avatara figure in Vedic and a lion figure.
Yeah.
And the avatar was there's two different versions. It may have been both, or two different stories have come into one. But Vishnu and Shiva will come up for the more you dig into it as the avatar for both of them. And Vishnu is the same one who was the avatar for Buddha, to give him the knowledge to start Buddhism. And what's interesting is Aslan is an incarnation. That's an incarnation. What Jesus does is not an incarnation.
Well, even what the most famous line in the books, because as a kid I read all of them, and I mean, it's acceptable and, as a child in Christianity to read those, even though they're mythical, in comparison to Harry Potter, which wasn't allowed. But the one of the most famous lines in all of the books is during the last battle, when he's talking to them and he says, "You must go to another world and tell them about me, for in that world I have another name." And they use it in the
Yeah.
movies, and they do it in the Prince Caspian one.
Yeah.
He says, in that world I have another name. And so I've never looked at that line as a insertion of incarnation like that.
Yeah. And an incarnation is what happens with Antichrist in the end time.
Right.
Right. So this Christ consciousness is being portrayed in this because this is how Christ consciousness would appear in another civilization on another planet. That's how that Aslan is depicted, because he's in another dimension actually as you go through the closet.
Well,
Right?
yeah, and how that world's created in the first book, the entire first, because he goes back and he wrote The Magician's Nephew, and The Magician's Nephew is all about
So,
dimensions.
yeah. And how many books in his sequel?
Say again, sir.
How many books in his cycle of stories about Narnia?
There's 7 Narnia
Yeah.
books.
Yeah, all done after the image and the age and the context of the 7 wandering stars.
Yes.
Right?
Well, and with that yeah.
When people, and I'm way behind on emails, if they do get the documents from me, I have that even at the end of it with how he based his 7 books in terms of, and give you some reference points. So, but this incarnation is not a Christian understanding. The Word was made flesh. The Holy Spirit made the soul and the body within Mary so that the Word, who already was, would go into it. He's not sharing a body with somebody, and this body was going to be used for something special. So, but from a polytheist version, they would counterfeit that, because they counterfeit everything. So that becomes their incarnation. So in the end time, the Christ consciousness is an incarnation.
I'm assuming you've read Lewis's works in a depth, or to a depth. In the books, when he is resurrected on top of the occult stone, essentially, right? In that stone in the books, they even mention it has like the writings of the world from when it was founded. In Freemasonry, last time we spoke, you mentioned how there is a place for magic to be done. Is there a correlation between those two things and the narrative of like Aslan's resurrection? Uh, in that,
I'm not sure I understood the question. And
so in Lewis's work, he talks about Aslan, and when he kills him, he
Yep.
dies the first
Yep.
time, and he's
Yep.
resurrected. He's resurrected on a like an altar, on a
Yep.
stone altar.
Yep.
When we spoke last, you had mentioned Freemasonry often
Yep.
has a ritualistic altar near
Yep.
its locations. Is there a correlation between that portion of the book and the Masonic ritualism? That's, I guess, my question.
Yeah, I think so, because in that polytheist, it's not a resurrection; it's a reincarnation. And it's not that he actually died, went to sleep. It's that their spirit is released as a disembodied spirit. So it happens bang, bang, right? And now you're into an altar in another location, in another dimension, as the allegory would be understood. And that would be in a place like Sheol or Hades, right? Um, and they would have you imagine that there are up to 7 different dimensions in polytheism. So each of these 7 planets are in 7 different dimensions.
And yes, you see that in his writings. He mentions all that.
Yes, he does.
Are you? He has a series
and that's polytheist doctrine.
He has a series of books called the Planetary series. And in it, it goes into detail about, and I was never aware of these books until the last couple years, but it goes into what you're talking about, the doctrine of like dimensions and how they believe in the ascension.
Yeah.
And I don't think that most Christians are aware of that portion of his writings. um, they're called like planetaria and things like that. And so you mentioned he has a bloodline that he goes back to. Specifically, what bloodline would that be if it is the bloodlines of the kings?
Llewellyn.
Okay. And is his writings that's influential of his
And by the way,
bloodline?
and they were the original kings of Wales. So in the document, if what I have laid out is how you trace Lewis back and its transliteration and back to the kings. I've just followed all through, just as I'll take Tolkien back to the bloodline of Odin.
And you see, that's what I was about to ask next, was like, you have to be kind of dense to look at any portion of JRR Tolkien's works and not see the ruinistic pagan magic in his
Yeah.
working.
Well, I mean, people will say, okay, I'm more easily able to toss Tolkien over the side, but not Lewis. So that's where I draw the line. And they'll say things like what you're saying. It's all these obviously different creatures, but if you looked at the characters in the
Well,
Narnia series,
Mr. Tumnus. Mr.
yeah,
Tumnus is Pan.
is a satyr. Yeah, he's a satyr. Bacchus is as well. He's got two satyrs
Yeah,
in there. You've got bloodlines that just go right back into history of the matriarchal bloodline. That's really when you look at the allegories going back to Lilith. In fact, it says that, as I
it does.
recall.
It does.
Yeah, and the names like that are used are all
Pagan,
named.
Janus the witch.
Yeah, and on and on and on. It's just I mean, they with Bacchus. I mean, they pull that right out of a satyr god's name, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable how far they get, and you start looking in at all of these different kinds of characters. This is polytheist history with a polytheist genealogy, with a polytheist religion. As you start to connect these things, because why would you put those bloodlines in if it wasn't important?
Well, and like again, sir, no, I've listened to you for over a decade now, and you've talked extensively, and you look, and then you go back with the same perspective, and you look with that fresh set of eyes onto these works. You have to almost sin willfully to ignore that these things aren't talking about godly things.
Yeah. And I'm not saying he's not a great writer, because he is, obviously. His
Yeah,
skill is unbelievable. And I'm not saying that the stories aren't entertaining.
Well,
They are.
Harry Potter's entertaining, and she's a phenomenal writer as well.
but you
Yeah.
go back. You said the organization that they were both a part of, at Oxford, right?
Yeah.
It was founded by Francis Bacon, and
No,
or
no.
what?
Francis Bacon had his own writing societies back in the time of Elizabeth and King
Okay,
James, right? But this is the Rosicrucian Golden Dawn organization, the one that Aleister Crowley founded.
correct. Okay, so you mentioned the traditional shaking and the
Yeah,
spear with the two deities in Greek mythology. You can
yeah,
see how like there's an influence behind it with that, right? In
yeah,
their writing, you said they were popular because, and that has to play a role. Like the spirits of this world propagating their doctrine,
yeah, yeah.
their religion, and so what better way to package it than under the guise of.
It's just
And
like Peter
and the
Pan.
children to boot.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it much more aggravating.
It's a lot like
Yes.
Peter Pan. They made it all cartoony and fun,
Yeah,
but the real story of Peter Pan's pretty dark.
Ridiculous, yeah.
yeah. And going through another portal,
Yeah.
a place where nobody ever dies of immortality. Pan,
Sacri
he's shown as a little fairy, but Pan, we all know who Pan is. It's a satyr goat god,
and he
right?
sacrifices children in it
Yeah.
when the
Just, yeah. It's just crazy how we have been prepared to accept these things. And people say they want to believe that, Christians can have good writers. Well, the reason why we don't have that many popular writers is that the publishing industry generally is dominated by polytheists, right? It's just like Hollywood. Why aren't there a lot of Christian movies? Because Hollywood's not Christian. It's really hard to get that stuff out and penetrate the hegemony because they control all of this. But just because somebody says he's a Christian, we should judge him or evaluate him. Judge is probably a poor word there. I'll switch that to evaluate him on the fruits. And how does that bring anybody to Christianity? It doesn't. How does that entertain people? It does. How does that brainwash people in preparation for polytheism? It does.
So how do you bring in something for those people who are probably still out there talking, well, okay, well, that's just a portion of Lewis's works. What about the things that are used in common defense of up in an apologetic sense that stray from his fantasy works? And I can see it. Me and Justin were speaking of this regarding specifically the screw tape letters, how it is truth out open when you really look at it from the perspective you're speaking from. So
So
how do you reconcile like mere Christianity and the screw tape letters in his
then, so, I mean, when you get into the fine sort of doctrine of how Gnostic Christianity works, you really have to understand the words that they're writing, that they're double entendres. It's kind of like what was listening to Pope Francis, where he would say things that you could take two ways. So they'll draft in things that sound Christian but have a polytheist meaning to it. I would say, and a lot of people have said, but he repented and became Christian at some point and renounced all of that. And I'm going, there's nothing on record that he ever renounced what he wrote,
uh-uh.
ever.
That is curious.
No, there's many people, yeah, that have renounced what they've wrote in life, and he's not one.
Yeah. So
And what better, deception
why
than
wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you?
right. What better deception, though, to name something mere Christianity? And then
Yeah.
when you look at it because there's portions of Gnosticism that if you don't look at it with discernment, it sounds correct. It sounds appealing.
So
It's very seducing.
what do you
That's
think
that's the style.
the goal is? Why were they planted in those in Oxford, or how did this come about?
Because you did mention that they would have not been, presumably of class or standard to.
Well, they had to be in Oxford. And you don't have any records of Lewis and Tolkien as being Freemasonry, and yet they're in the Rosicrucian Society. That can't happen, and Rosicrucian is higher than Freemasonry. But if you are a pureblood, you are initiated from childhood. You're not allowed to take an adept title till you're 25 to 30 years old, but you are higher than a Freemason adept. You are higher than Illuminati. You are higher than Rosicrucian. You are pureblood, and you just don't have the title yet. And again, that's not unusual. And you look at religions as that adulthood, and even in the Bible, is 20 to 40 years old, right? And there's a process, right? So that's the same thing. It's just the counterfeiting of the monotheism than polytheism. So you can look at the priesthoods and say, "Whoa, there seems to be a lot of similarities." Yeah, but it's who they're worshiping, and one's counterfeiting the other. And what it comes down to is which one do you believe is being counterfeited, and which one is trying to always create the same agenda that happened before the flood and the same end goal. It's all about that, because the history that they're bringing to you is telling you this is going to happen again,
Mm-hmm.
but not in the way the Bible tells you.
So, for example, with Tolkien, Tolkien was in the First World War, and so, uh, and he was he dealt with all kinds of stuff. Is there any history that you're aware of anything he did in Europe that associated with any Freemasonry or anything of that nature? I mean, I know that he was a soldier on the front lines and everything in the trenches, but um, even the movie they made a few years ago about Tolkien and the origin of the Lord of the Rings and all of that,
Yeah.
they didn't touch on his childhood. They didn't really do anything there, and um,
You can trace his genealogy, and I do it in the document, but most people say you really can't. They do migrate to England, but the Tolk family came down into Normandy in the time of Rollo, who changed their names to the St. Clairs with the Treaty of St. Clair when they expropriated Normandy from France. This is the same bloodlines that then moved over to Scotland as the De Bruces and the Sinclairs, as we understand it, who developed Freemasonry, and William the Conqueror, right, in 1066. And he's part of that Royale class that comes there. And there's also a branch that moves over into Germany that's more closely associated with Tolkien. But he's elite and nobility all the way through, and so is his family. And how he gets into Oxford at that time is that's the only way you're going to be there, because they wouldn't have had the money if you buy into who they say he is in terms of this poor average person, right?
Well, so
And
both
where
of
and,
them, both
and
of
so they're
them
not,
were
so
related
they
to
weren't,
kings. Sorry.
yeah, so they weren't in the Inkling Society to learn about the history. They already knew it. They're there to have their literary crafts developed so that they could become a good novelist.
So this was kind of what they were born for, that this was their purpose, their destiny.
Yeah, that's what their role to be. I mean, look at what Shakespeare wrote, whether it's him or it's Bacon, doesn't really matter. If you go with a standard genealogy of who Shakespeare is, he's the son of a butcher with no Oxford education, but he's talking Oxford language of that time. And he has this vast knowledge of occult history and ancient history that he ought not to know.
Right, as a layman. And it is interesting because you said that they were both mentioned or both related to kings, and they were both there at the same time. And so,
Yes.
like, it's just another example of the spirits of this world that seek to keep their lines close and together and eyes on them, because it is coincidental that two of the most prolific authors of the last century were there at the same time and have kind of dubious origins in regards to their blood. Like, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in divine storytelling, and
Especially
so
not with these kind of people. There's no
no.
coincidences.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the last point in time where there was this complete utter dominance of writing. It starts to expand as more people become educated. They're still controlling it through the brainwashing at the universities, who controls the publishing, but it's not from this very small class of people, right? It's a larger, broader class. Um, but I mean, they are raised up to saint-like status.
Oh yeah.
And I just don't know why we can't recognize that. Yes, they can be very good writers. Maybe they're Christians or not, but they never renounced their writings, and they were writing about polytheism.
It's almost like they're writing their version of history, or like their Bible.
Well, in a
It's
lot of
their
ways it is, isn't it?
it's their cultural biases that goes in it. So in where you see the overlaps of fairies and types of beings, you have a Celtic, Irish, Welsh, Scottish sort of overlay, but when Tolkien does his, it's Norse.
Right.
Mm.
And
Why? Because that's where his bloodline goes back to.
And it makes sense because when you look at different types of, even in a real world setting, you look at the people who are attracted to those writings. Like I
Yeah.
make knowing what my blood is and everything. Like I've always been attracted to like Tolkien and stuff like that. Whereas I know plenty of people who are
Yep.
our friend Miss Linda is very British, much always his love.
And you look at all the different book series that Tolkien and Lewis, from there. I mean, you could say Harry Potter was inspired from them.
Everything.
Yeah.
Terry
Right?
Brooks with the Shannara Chronicles books.
Game of Thrones.
I mean, the
It
list
it
it's endless.
it really took it mainstream along with other pushes like Walt Disney,
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
who are
because
rising about the same time and are
well,
now doing the same history for the same target markets, only on film, right? It's unbelievable how all of these things start working together. And Walt Disney, I mean, everybody says, well, of course he's Freemason. No, he wasn't. He's Rosicrucian. That's the entertainment part that the Rosicrucians handle in terms of part of their agenda.
and you see the the consolidation of media right, by Disney even, and you see the other controlling media empires are all origins of similar nature and such, but
Well, CBS is their logos like
is
an
the eye,
eyeball.
right? And
Yeah.
NBC's the peacock. But you look at Disney specifically, like you just said, Mr. Wayne, and you see that, Fantasia was one of their very first, like,
Yeah.
real big ones.
Hercules.
And what is Fantasia? It is all witchcraft. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the one scene is about selling your soul for power.
Cinderella.
They all
Their
are.
cat's name is Lucifer.
Yeah.
And
It's
Cinderella.
just, once you start to dig into these things, you just can't sort of say it's all coincidence. And also at the time of the rising, you have, in the 30s, you start to get, and probably in the 20s, but again, we're in the same sort of time zone. You get the starting of the horror classics,
Mm.
both in film and more in writings and being developed. It's another avenue of the same polytheist religion. And then you have the rise of the alien phenomena.
Right. L. Ron
Oh,
Hubbard and those dudes.
yeah. Yeah. This again,
And you,
it's different organizations all linked in going in the same direction that are launching, saying this is the time of preparedness that we need to have put in place. And because they're all Gnostics, they're thinking in the same line of Alice Bailey, where they had 2025 lined up.
Mm.
well, and even in the century before the last, you had things like Grimm's fairy tales that
Yeah.
told bunch of origin stories
Yeah.
and mythos.
Boy, those are dark.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a copy. They are extreme, some of them, but the resurrection, the good guy always winning, that's not as
Yeah.
prevalent there, and that's very truth. You've seen a softening or a palatability almost of this occultism wide open, and you can't turn on any programming now without it being fully entrenched into the market, even in literature, like you're saying.
Even now, it's almost like, is he a bad guy, or maybe he's misunderstood, or, the bad guys aren't as bad guys as they used to be.
Well, and you see that, when the scriptures say that, the enemy appears as an angel of light, that you see in this entertainment, you see in this, and that's what you're saying. He's not the bad guy.
They've
It's
gotten away from like Joseph Campbell's, oh, what is that called? The Warrior's Journey or whatever.
Yeah.
But you see, like with going back to a literary character between Tolkien and Lewis, somebody like Gandalf and Tolkien's works, that totally skews the perspective of Christianity and the resurrection of the spirit to more of, like you were saying, reincarnation.
Yeah, because he comes back as Gandalf the White.
Right, and you see it over and over
Yeah.
again in the scripture or in their storytelling. They're counterfeit of the scriptures when you really pay attention.
And
Uh,
and the other thing is where's the Christian side in these stories? Where's God?
right.
Where's the parable? If you're going to do it as, okay, this is a fictional parable, where's the moral of the story from a Christian perspective? Where
When
is
I've
it? It's all missing, and that's why it was important for Lewis to put a Christ-like figure in there, but masterfully in the Gnostic understanding.
I've heard it say that they've tried. I've heard some circles argue that Aragon and Tolkien's work is supposed to be representative of Christ's.
I've heard that the elves were supposed to be angels in Lord of the
Correct.
Rings as well.
Well, and
But I mean, even in that in itself, comparing angels and elves seems like a problem.
but the Samarillion is the
Yeah.
one where I think he really like details his truths in what he really is, because going back after reading your works and things and looking with that perspective in those eyes, the Samarillion is Satan talking when you really look, and it is the Gnosticism of really not much different than
Yeah.
Mormonism in that novel, and it's presented as like the codex for the entire realm that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
And so in literary works like that, Tolkien and Lewis, they came before L. Ron Hubbard, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay. So like you said, you get the fantastical magic with Tolkien and Lewis. And then you start to delve into the spiritual, like the conjuring of the truth of those things in what we call modern sci-fi and stuff. And really, as somebody who used to read a lot, it's hard to read a book when you know all these things for fun. Um, all these books that are in this genre of sci-fi, whether it's Robert Jordan and his Time Wheel saga or George R. R. Martin, they're all the same story.
Yep, orcs, dwarfs,
They're all the same
whatever.
story,
Yeah,
and
they
they're
are.
telling the same story. And
Yeah.
even in the Robert Jordan series, there's 7 wheels in that time series. I never caught that.
And then there's the new movie coming out, the Odyssey. They're making the Odyssey movie.
Well, and so they keep telling this narrative to us. Excuse me. In a preparation, that's what you're saying, right? They're clearing
Priming.
the pathway and priming us like a motor, so that when the flip is switched
Yeah.
on, or the switch is flipped on, we accept it.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Well,
that-
let me just sort
Yeah,
of
Go
bring
ahead, sir.
this
Yes, sir.
into perspective, and it's also why in one form of eschatology it has to be rewritten and re-understood. Is that there's a great falling away of the church, right? There is going to be a significant amount of Christianity and organized Christianity that's going to go with the Babylon polytheist religion. And it's only going to be the true Christians, the ones that are probably, for lack of, because we're not quite there yet, the conservative sort of view versus the liberal view. And even within the Catholic Church, you see that split, and there's going to be that split there as well, are going to say, no, that's not what our history is. That's not who Jesus is. That's not who God is. But they prepared us to accept what they're going to sell us when the false prophets come along. So you have to get to that point where they start to reveal things and catastrophes start to happen, and they take credit for these catastrophes to convert or be destroyed from the face of the earth, that they're playing on the seed that's not well grounded. That will be the ones who fall away, as Jesus told us about.
How I growing up, you in the church, Justin and I have always heard of, the great falling away, and we come in different eschatological backgrounds,
Yep.
but very similar, I would say. Uh, do you have a set time frame? Do you think that that's a long drawn thing? Do you think that like it began in the last century with Lewis, not Lewis specifically, but stuff like that, and the introduction over time? Because this is something that I don't I've never felt is a rapid thing, but I'd be very interested to understand in your relationship to all this how you would think it goes together.
Well, I would say that the polytheist forces had, invaded Christianity a long time ago
Oh yeah.
and have controlled it to various degrees throughout its history, and have been ready for the end time and the falling away, even though they have to wait for the ordained time. They're always trying to prepare for having things happen before the ordained time. So yes, it's been there, and they have to, every generation, they have to double down and continue to prepare and adapt with the times. When we look at how the Roman Church has been in position for a very long time to be part of this universal religion, I'm not saying it's going to be, but certainly will be part of. But so will a lot of Christianity as we look at the eschatology that sort of goes with it. It's not exclusive to the Roman Church. And that we've seen all of the Gnostic influences in Protestantism within the churches, within the teachings, within the symbols. So they've been preparing us for a long period of time. It's just now hitting a higher level of sort of a fever pitch, if I can sort of put it that way, and that they're becoming even more bold and in your face as we go, which means their confidence is getting higher that the time is coming, and they want to make sure that they're going to bring on as many as they can with them, because they look at Christianity as the large force, that and Islam, but for a different reason, and how they're going to, and their ways of dealing with those two groups are different, but at the end of the day, they need to convert people to monotheism, get it down to, over to polytheism, not monotheism, get them to convert to polytheism over time. And then one last sort of small step for humankind, so to speak. And to be able to get that number down who stay loyal to as small as possible so that they can handle that type of populist rebellion.
So, why do you think that your take on C.S. Lewis and Tolkien seems to ruffle so many feathers? Because I mean, I didn't know any better either until I heard you say it, and then I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. Like, yeah, that's fine as long as it's the truth. I'm happy with it.
They sold Tolkien and Lewis very, very well as Christians and superhero Christians.
Mm,
So people bought into their religion, and they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to say I'm appreciating polytheism. So it's really difficult because you grow up on it.
right.
And your parents told you this. The church told you this. It's absolutely ingrained. And it's like when somebody isn't prepared to look at prophecy with clear cut scripture, they'll believe if they're not prepared to dig into the detail and do all of the topology and line everything up, they're prepared to believe something is different than what's written there because they bought into that and they don't want to upset their whole life of belief system and say, how could I be so wrong? And we got all of the world that teaching this type of eschatology and don't want to admit it's the wisdom of the world. When you start rewriting what Jesus said, take a step back.
It kind of reminds me. This would probably ruffle more feathers, but we don't celebrate Christmas, Easter, any of the pagan holidays.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing. When you tell somebody, "Hey, Christmas is pagan," they get
Yeah,
really upset.
they do.
Well,
Or
and
Easter.
Yes, oh, very upset. It's like
Yeah,
you're poking the wrong thing, man.
Easter
yeah,
is always the one that
yeah.
yeah.
And or ask what does Samhain or Halloween have to do with
Mhm.
Christianity?
Well, and we try to be, we don't,
It's a whole most holy day of polytheism, but
and we don't observe, we're not legalists in how we observe the high Sabbaths or whatnot, but
Yep,
we do keep the Sabbaths, and uh, it if you keep the Sabbaths, you can see how blasphemous the world's religious system and holidays are because they're
yeah.
all black masses, so to speak, in regards to
I'm just going
our
to lean
faith.
over and get something here.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
I started when I went down that road, I wanted my faith to be authentic.
Okay.
And to be authentic, you gotta get those things
I
out.
love teaching aids, Mr. Wayne.
Yeah. Well, this is, if I can get it on camera there. Okay. I want to get it closer. That's the wheel of polytheism in
Right.
terms of their 8 holy Sabbaths.
Mm,
Okay. And their holy Sabbaths work on the equinoxes and um, the solstices. So December 21, June 21, March 21, September 21. And so when you start seeing what's going on in Lewis in the winter, that's beginning the solstice um, holiday. And it is, it's called Yule. What do we celebrate at Christmas? Yule tidings, the hunt of Odin, the 12 days of Christmas, right? And it overlaps into December 21 and then December 25, which is Mithra's birth date. That again, it's just absolutely crazy. And then in the 6 week points, you're going to have like between Halloween or between September 21 and December 21 is 6 weeks, which is Halloween. That happens for 11 days. So you have like Valentine's Day, which is Lupercalis, a satyr
Mhm.
festival for Valentine's, right? You have May Day. I mean, all of these are days that we do separate celebrations around, And with several of them, like with Easter and with Christmas, is right in with those festivals. And then they overload it with polytheism and can worship in plain sight and then get us to do their rituals in plain sight. It's the same thing. And so writings of these books will be centered around these holidays and these dates.
Well, and it's a spiritual feeding, right? Like by getting the unwilling to, or not unwilling, the unknowing to participate unwillingly, unknowingly, they get a spiritual power source from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and you see it like I don't know about you, but this past winter season during their Feast of Yule felt very different than it has in years past. It felt very much darker, grayer than it has in years before. And it's, I don't know if it was the overload of the turmoil of the things they're, working in the world in their other ways, but you could see that it was distracted. It was different. Um, and so when they throw all this in our faces, like they have a new documentary movie, or not movie coming out, not documentary, a new movie coming out called Disclosure by Steven
It's out.
Spielberg. It
The
already came out.
disclosure documentary thing?
Yes, and
Yep.
so, and it's kind of the building off of this, because the one thing that I disagree strongly with Tim Alberino about is uh, planets and dimensions. I look at it I don't like those words, but uh, these things are going on in this realm, in the realm of the unseen, not off site, right? I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I believe in interdimensionals.
Yeah.
That's actually a great
Well,
question, Gary. How,
but it's kind of
what do you think of that?
yeah, it's kind of a combination of both. So, I mean, within the firmament, we have the seven wandering stars, right?
Right.
So we know there's planets, and then we know outside is the universe. So the question is do these beings come intergalactical or interdimensional? But everything that's in the occult would say interdimensional. But that doesn't dismiss that there aren't some planets, and they're
Right.
celebrated, right? Yeah.
I didn't
No,
mean that. Right.
I
Okay.
know you didn't. I just so when people are listening, that they have a frame of reference there. So is there a possibility that there are planets and galaxy? Absolutely. I mean, God can have it's this. We have no idea how big the universe is, but in the area that we're playing with is more interdimensional, and we're told about different dimensions in the Bible. We know there's a dimension for heaven. We know there's a physical world. We know there's a place called Sheol or Hades that's likely in another dimension in the earth, right? And so we also know there's an earth. Then things are going on in the earth as well, depending on whichever belief system you come on that. There's a physical aspect, and then there's this interdimensional aspect where the gods of polytheism go to, where the demonic spirits are trying to get through. So we want to be in a position where we're not being deceived by different sort of pulls apart philosophies that are designed to cattle herd us. What we can deal with is what the Bible tells us and what we can sort of physically discern and understand ourselves. So if there's anything beyond that, fine. If there isn't, fine. But we know this part to be true.
And
Beyond that, we don't get biblically, and if it's not biblical that we're getting a reference to, it's probably a deception. And that everything that's mentioned biblically, it will not be a total dismissing of, it'll be a counterfeit or reimagining of what it is or what it means. And that's the same tactic that's used for scripture, a reimagining of what it means.
when
It's it's the same language if you understand it.
And you see it even going back to what we've been talking about, Tolkien's work with the realm of man and all of the Eastlands where the elves and the old men went, and where they left and they ascended to,
Yeah,
and
and they have names that link back to gods as their
right,
original
yeah,
creators that end in EL. There's a lot of EL names that are in
yeah.
there. And, at the end of the trilogy, you have all of these different creatures that are created in polytheism around the world. They're all on this arc sailing away. Why now? Because it's the age of man. That's the flood.
Right.
They're no longer going to be visible and allowed to be visible, even though they may interact through the dimensions. So again, you're getting the polytheist history, their lens of what happened told in an interesting sort of way. And you just have to sort of understand, what is that imagery telling us? When you have the white elves there, what color are their hair and what color are their eyes? You have blonde hair, you have red hair, you have blue eyes, you have hazel eyes and very pale skin, and they're quite a bit taller than all of the little ones.
Mm-hmm.
These are the Shea people, Sidhe, or Seed, or Side. It's pronounced 100 different ways. These are the Tuatha De Danann giants, the fair
Right.
folk, the fairy folk. These in the elemental hierarchy, white elves are not there. You have light elves, but not white elves, and you have dark elves. These are variations within the ugly groupings of hobbits and dwarves and gnomes and those ones. But this is a separate being, and they're treated as a separate type of nobility that you just aren't really understanding why. They move with grace. They're very, very educated. They're very, very elite. They're telling us in everything that this is a superior being, even to the humans.
Yeah, because they save them
Well,
too.
don't all the humans leave and the hobbits stay or something
No,
too?
no, the humans stay in the
Humans stay and the hobbits leave.
and the elves leave.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, well, that's incredible though when you take the step back and we remove our biases, because that's what life promotes and that's what the devil works upon, right? Is the enemy seeks to capture and to divide through biases and through personal opinion. But the one thing that's very admirable about you, Gary, is that you present the truth as fact and you don't put your own spin on it. And so when the words say what the words say, I mean, even the ring in Tolkien's works, right?
Yeah.
In elementary magic and stuff, ruins are important, and so the entire book deals with magical ruins essentially as
Yeah.
well too, and it's so
Lord of the
social.
Rings.
Right. It's
The
so socially acceptable, the ring, and the ruins and the open face,
yeah,
Nordic worship.
yeah.
That makes me wonder, what does the ring represent that Frodo carries and he puts on, and what's the deal with that?
Well, where the kings were given their authority by the Council of the Gods is this circular assembly. This is the Ring of Kings. It's like the Knights of the Round Table. Those are all kings, right? And a ring is a representation of that, but it comes with magic and power. And
Can you
again, depend.
Go ahead, sir.
And so when we see that ring entered into some apocrypha, like with King Solomon, that's them overlaying polytheism onto that story. It's a sure sign to the polytheists, and monotheists say, "Oh, somehow Solomon could control the demons with his rings. He would just control it through the Holy Spirit. He doesn't need a ring to control the demons." It's
Well,
just
and even if you
we
look
just
at
have to look at the imagery of what they're overlaying. So I mean, this ring is something that we should expect to come back again in the end time, because even to even into modern times, the modern king wears a ring of kingship as a sign that he's the king. It probably marks the new golden age with these 10 kings, and they're going to bring back to life all of this imagery of Atlantis and the antediluvian times, and they're going to have a new ring of power.
when if you look at the characters that are given their rings, all each one of them have a different realm of power in it, and
Yeah,
then the dark ring that binds them all to rule them, and it's from a place of darkness, right?
yeah,
And
and
going back,
because what happens with that is understanding that these kings are given their divine right to rule by the specific god who rules over that country and kingdom.
and that's a great point, because the god that you're dealing with in Tolkien's work, little g, and in Lewis's work, they're two different deities that their homage is going towards, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
And so, um, do you think that that's intentional for mass appeal? And follow up on that same question is, do you think that it's intentional for, mm, like, to call people in a modern sense, like to that specific cult or that specific esoteric theology, that those books and authors have put forth? Like Tolkien's work deals more with the Nordic side of things, like you said. So is there a correlation between that purpose in their writing?
Yeah, there is, because you're trying to reach a global audience. So you're going to get Eastern religions in some of them, Chinese religions in some of them. And they're trying to sort of make common ground and bring all of these religions, as they're disparate now, back to the original religion, that they're just a branch, a vernacular local version with the same gods with just different names of the same belief system. So that's why they're playing it out with so many different cultures and religions. You know, even the 7 days of the week, you're mixing three pantheon of gods there. They're the same gods in each of the same in the same pantheon. So um, you've got Greek, you've got Latin, and you've got Norse in the
Right.
7 days of the week.
You mentioned the some authors have Eastern writing. So another author, and he happened to die on the same day as Lewis,
Yep.
Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley's works have a very Eastern touch to them. So when you read books like Brave New World or Spyglasses of Gaza, things like that, they deal with a lot of like Eastern mysticism.
Yep.
And so this is a nice segue into my other topic I'd like to talk about. Um, some of the Eastern gods and such as well, or little g bloodlines.
Yep.
And some authors, maybe aside from Huxley, or someone who have really proliferated those cultures, uh, bloodlines and pantheons.
I see. Yeah, I mean, anytime that you're seeing um, anything to do with Buddhism or Buddhist-like organizations, understand that that is sort of reaching into that. So Star Wars, as not a author, but they're reaching into that Eastern mysticism with their Jedi bloodline, right? Because and the Brahmins have a bloodline. Like the original priests were all bloodline, just as you have a bloodline priesthood in ancient Israel. Again, counterfeit, but the Brahmin bloodline goes back to Nephilim bloodlines, back to, you know, to the gods that had produced them. So that's really how you're going to sort of delineate who those writers are. But you see a kind of a mix of Eastern mysticism with Gnosticism. And because they can become blended, that's what Blavatsky did, along
Mhm.
with Egyptian religion, right? And Atlantean religion. But hers was more Eastern, but it was a Gnostic aspect, but it blended in other sort of types. So what I would suggest is that you may have some writers that are more focused on Norse, like Tolkien, but the reach is to reach a commonality around the world. So you're trying to touch on that in as much of, or they're trying to touch on that as in as much literature as possible. The bottom line is that almost, let's just for a random number, because I don't have a study on this, 99% of the literature that's written on novels is polytheist.
Oh yeah, and
It's
like
just whatever slant that you're getting into. I mean, the superhero one is the best one to cross all cultures. Um, what I liked about uh, Bram Stoker's Dracula was it connected a Middle Europa belief system, which had a mix of East and West, as well as they put in that sort of draconian um, belief system into those stories. So, but it's just so large that what I try and do to just try and make sense of it is just boil it down to some basic sort of things. Is what types of characters are they writing about? What do they say about their religion when they're practicing it? They may not mention a specific religion, but is it a nature worship or what is it? And you can start to see other polytheist lines that are wedded into there. And when they get really bold, they're talking about where the world's going to go.
So
So I, but I was going to say as well on the Eastern writings, also look for anything that has Shambhala in it, so that you've got within that understanding is the Shambhala is in the inner earth or in another dimension, right? It's where their gods are located. It's like Nergal, it's like Hades uh, or Sheol, and they will have two locations for cities in that belief system as well. One will have Lord Maitreya, another one will have King Sudras. One would be more Persian, Avestan Zoroastrianism. The other one is Sanskrit Zoroastrianism.
well, you brought up Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism they claim that they are the oldest, like continually practiced
Yeah,
religion of that region. And you
yeah,
see with the turmoil in Iran and everything that's going on in the world, a resurgence of that faith.
yeah.
I the mingling of it into writings has been prevalent too. I've seen in other literature, but how do you see the rise of these ones that we in the West, because we don't look to the East the same way,
Yeah.
specifically in the Americas. We don't really look to the Orient.
Yep.
Um, and so like humanism and Buddhism are very well connected, and we see that
Mhm.
like infiltrating our society today. Zoroastrianism and Buddhism, they come from two different source points, correct? And if they don't, how do they work together in like a modern sense with these
Yeah.
bloodlines in the world's perspective?
So Buddhism comes out of Hinduism. Hinduism is Zoroastrianism.
That was simple.
Yeah. And Buddha gets his religion and adds to it when he becomes the avatara of Vishnu, right? So it's kind of like a New Testament, so to speak, of the Bible in a polytheist sense. And then that religion spreads to China as Taoism, that we know today as Taoism with a T. And then that religion spreads to Japan as Shintoism. And the eastern part is the same religion that comes from Babel, because the people of Babel who are moving east are moving in amongst the giants, who this is the religion of the giants, but they were already worshiping the religion of the giants at Babel, right?
Okay.
So they have the same religion when they're going there. And so the other side of it is you're going to have the t- let me back up a step. You have the two starting points that people like to look at for religion after the flood. You have Babel and you have Egypt. So you have Mizraim and Ham moving to Egypt with Hermes in the Gnostic account, and that's going to spread mysticism around the Mediterranean. The ones who stay in Shinar are going to be the Magi and continuing practicing, but the ones that migrate east and are moving into amongst other giants there are still going to be practicing the same religion. So the religion that the polytheists believe that started up at Babel is the religion that a fellow by the name of Hermes uh, found underneath the pyramid, along with all of the antediluvian knowledge. And he takes it to Nimrod with the antediluvian knowledge to build Babel City and Babel Tower. And this is the religion from before the flood that I like to call Enochian mysticism, but the polytheists understand it as Zoroastrianism. Okay. And so within the Sanskrit version of the Indus Valley, where you had these two groups of Aryans, one went to Persia, the other one went to the Indus Valley. That's why you have Avestan and Sanskrit. Um, you have a Trismegistus there as well, but it's the Zoroastrian Trismegistus. It's not Hermes Trismegistus, it would be Zoroaster Trismegistus. And so you have one that goes back for the flood, and his name was Garamond, but he becomes a follower of Zoro, an Aster, a star, a god of the stars, as you take that back in its meaning, and a female goddess at that. And he gets taught the original Zoroastrian religion. And then it restarts again after the flood with the Zoroaster. And then another one about 600 BC. So you have the same Trismegistus aspect, just with a different vernacular tradition.
So, what would have been the religion that was practiced when they took the stars and moons off the camels in Scripture after they were defeated? I cannot recall at the exact moment who was defeated, but they took the stars and the moons off their camels, it says. Would that have been a prototype of Zoroastrianism? Would that would have been the post-flood religion
Precursor.
that wasn't worshiping Yahweh, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So depending on how you have giants who show up after the flood and who teaches them the religions and the technologies that they have, if they're recreated versus surviving, it's going to sort of affect how you look at where was monotheism at that time? How long did it go to be almost extinct by the time of Abraham? And how did that get swallowed up by polytheism? And when and where did that happen? Because you'd have so many of those different kinds of stories. I don't think everybody at Babel was polytheist. I think a lot of people just said, I'm going to do what I have to do to live, but I still believe in the God of the Bible. But certainly within the Middle East area, by the time of Abraham, you sort of deduce from the story he's the last monotheist, at least in the Middle East, right?
So, who would be some of who, if there is any in the open, that would be of these bloodlines of the East? So,
Right.
or
So just before I get there, I just thought I'd throw in another account of the Zoroastrianism and
yes,
the mixing of the East and the West side of that sort of religion. So there's an individual that some church fathers write about called Chem Zarathustra. In that, understand that the Gnostics look at this as a significant patriarch of polytheism at the time of Babel and shortly after, and moves over to Egypt with Ham, right? And so that word chem, Chem, sometimes spelled Cham, is actually pronounced Ham, Ham Zarathustra. And so what they're saying is that he is taking that Zoroastrian religion to Egypt, which is that other pillar, right? And that's kind of their way of saying how that smoothens out in terms of what I was talking about. But sometimes I forget to get into the polytheist shoes versus describing it from the monotheist side, but understand that they have their own version of these same events, but seen through the polytheist lens as to how that happens. So when you get that in ancient Egypt, you have the Essenes of the Therapeutate religion, which is of the Egypt polytheism, and then the Kabbalism comes back at the time of the Babylon destruction for the other part of the Eastern mysticism.
are you familiar with something called the Corbin Bible?
Yes.
Is that that fits into that narrative that you just mentioned, correct?
Yes, largely it's describing a similar type of scenario to that. Yep.
Is it the same time frame, or would that
Yes,
be
basically, yeah.
okay? And so, because that's from the polytheistic viewpoint,
Yes.
and first time I read it, it's like, oh well, you guys are the ones that we're talking about in the Bible. It was a very odd read because it's the other side of that story.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to know if that's where that fit at.
So when we look at now at bloodlines in the East, and China is the easiest way, and understand there's a migration that gets over there, but they have a both before and after the flood. Whether or not their accounts as we get it after the flood written down is of something that was located before the flood elsewhere, and it's been sort of implanted onto the migrants in China. Both sides of the flood, you have a bloodline of royals and priests that are produced from the Watcher gods, the Tengu gods. And these are the dragon creator gods, right? And the offspring are the sons of heaven. So we would understand these as the Sinim in the Bible, Sinim, the people of the East. We only get that name, I think, used once, maybe twice in the Old Testament. And so this would be sort of akin to what we should expect in the end time of the kings of the East. And so we have a reference to what's being talked about. I think that's probably the only reason why we get the Sinim mentioned. But you have other peoples of the East. It just depends on how far east, right? So when you have like the as they're shown in Genesis 15 as the Cadmonites, the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, these are the ancient ones of the East. And in book 2, I cover off all of these meanings of the names of these people. And the Persians are the people of the East.
Right.
And so you have another group of people of the East, because the Persians are Aryans. Another group of people of the East are the Elamim, the Olamim. Same word. And so when the people of Shem, descendants of Shem, of Elam as we come to know them, are intermarrying, they're intermarrying with the giants there. And historians will say there's two different groups of people. We don't know where they kind of both come from, but Olamim are the original aboriginals that the Elamites are going to move in and intermarry with after Babel. These are all of the bloodlines that are intermixing within at least the East as far as Assyria and Persia are, and Babylon, but the Sinim seem to be even farther east. So now if you look, okay, if there's two different groups of giants as in Indo-Aryans, and as we mentioned, the Sanskrit and the Avestan, the Persian and the Indus Valley, the Sinim was probably the Indus Valley people that people of Babel would have migrated to move into as well. That seeded later the Chinese in the Southeast Asia and into Japan. And so when we look at bloodlines, we're essentially, whether it's in the West or in the East, we can only really go back to the time of the flood. And even then, we don't have complete writings early on, but you get the oral traditions written down somewhere thereafter. So you have these bloodlines that have come down through history from the East, and there's a whole bunch of ones in India. But they've had such turmoil over there in the last 400 or 500 years. You don't get the old names that are still in power. They still may be there and hidden. We just get more recent names that sort of come to the surface. But in China, we do have Li and Shi as two bloodlines of the Shah dynasty, XIA and XI. President Shi is from the Shah people, from the sons of dragons as the royal bloodline after the flood, only from the Western bloodline.
Okay.
Okay.
So
And he's back in power. And the other one that's prominent is the Yamato bloodline, which is again thought to be an offshoot of the original Shah dynasties, with the original empires that came down to the early 1900s. It was a consistent continuation of the same empire, even though they have different names over different periods, same bloodlines. And then all the, for the most part, all of the Asian, Southeast Asia kings were bloodlines of the Shah dynasty as well, because they just were expanding their empire.
So we see really, with the hegemony of say things like BRICS over
Yep.
the region, and with China's geopolitical influence, that's definitely more of the spiritual domain. So that bloodline rules that region then, and has a pretty good firm lock on that region from what you're
Yes.
describing. So it's in a geographic sense, is it in your opinion, probably the most locked down of the of those
Yes.
kinds of regions?
Yeah. So for me is, and Japanese would, they recognize the tradition of the start of their dynasty around 600 BC.
Mhm.
Um, they may not say, well, that was coming from the Chinese. They create another almost creation story and beginning of people and dynasty in that mythos. So the question for me is that a separate bloodline or regarded as a separate bloodline? And is that ruled over by a separate fallen angel of the Council of the Gods? Or is it the same? Because if you start up dynasties, it follows the hierarchy back to the original one that seeded that new kingdom, back to the same sort of patriarchal celestial mafia godfathers. So I look at Japan though as a separate entity. So I think that's a separate bloodline, just and the Chinese one is separate from that. And I would also look at, when we look at in some end time prophecy now with Ezekiel 38, where it's talking about Persia. Remember, there's two Persias,
Mhm.
Indus Valley and what we would know as Persia. That's going to be mostly Iran and Iraq and those countries in that region. But Persia could also mean they're the Indus Valley patriarchs as well. So when Persia is part of that alliance of the 10 kings, which one is it referring to? Is it all one or is there two separate ones? And yep, are they part, and is the one in India, is that part of the kings of the east because they're further east? Probably part of the kings of the east. I think and they may not be sort of understood as Persia, and we're just going to get them biblically as the kings of the east in the New Testament. But there's going to be that group in there as well that's going to be dominant. And today, if we overlay that, okay, we think this is the end time, then somehow India is going to play a big part, and they're part of that organizational structure with China and Russia already today. You've got two of the five. You might as well put Iran in there if they're going to be part of that as well. Um, but maybe with what happens, Iran, as we know it as Persia, kind of gets almost destroyed. And maybe that's going to fall under the influence of India. I mean, who knows?
Didn't the empire of the old Persia stretch, as you just said, all the way to the Indus Valley?
Yes, yes,
And so contextually, that makes sense.
yeah,
Like even historically, the narrative that God has kept detailed
yep,
to that degree,
yep,
stationing them to their boundaries. And I
yep.
agree with you. I
And
would
what
go
and
ahead.
why
Sorry.
Alexander went that far. He wanted to have the greatest empire ever and get to those far sides and then extend further so that he could become a greater empire.
Well, and I agree with you with the Japanese, Chinese being different because you look at the last century and the annihilation that the Japanese did in war. Even that doesn't make sense without a spiritual backing.
Yeah.
Just the total depravity that
And
was laid.
and and we don't know how the situation between the Sunni and the Shia is going to resolve itself. Uh, the Western bloodlines would have a massive war there to get rid of one of the groups and then fold the survivor in with them.
What do you think is the most likely outcome? Because from the last statistic I saw, Islam has overtaken Christianity as the dominant religion with 1.69 billion people in adherence, and it's like 70-30 within that of Sunni and Shiite.
Well, something catastrophic will have to happen to Islam because I don't think under any prophet or catastrophes that sort of worldwide that will fold them into the polytheist religion. So the way you make that happen then is you create this war between the two, and they all but they take themselves out of complete influence. What we do know as well, I think you could deduce, is that an Islamic universal religion is not likely to be the case because under any circumstance, they will not permit, under all circumstances, they will not permit in any way, shape, or form for the Jewish people to build a temple on the wing of the existing temple and to start their sacrifices.
Well, and
That just can't coexist.
and traditionally for the last 50, 60 years, Iran has been the, and I always get it backwards, so correct me, please, if I misspeak. They've been the backer of Sunni Islam. And so you can kind of see the fermentation of what you're talking about, like for the necessity, because the other is neither is truly that tolerant, but the other is far more tolerant in a interdenominational, that's not the right word, interfaith sense.
Yeah. Even in the Hadiths, and they have different Hadiths in each sect. There's more than one sect or two sects. There is two Mahis or Mahdis, depending on how you want to pronounce that, and one wins. So, and each of them will look at that Mahdi as being their Messiah.
And
So, there's a lot pointing that there's going to be a lot of internal destruction there at some point.
Well, and with the stuff going on in Iran, this is probably the first time I've heard Zoroastrianism like talked about on the news, if you
Yeah.
want to call X the news. But you know, I mean, that's like the first time I've seen it brought up. They're like, yeah, and it seems like we're building to that.
well, I knew a man once when I was going through, I did donated plasma for a long time before I knew any better, and he was a nurse, and he was a Zoroastrian, however you say that, an adherent of Zoroastrianism. And I learned a lot about it, and I didn't know that they have and this, the occult, they all have things they claim to as for their legitimacy, and everything, but they have, and Christianity has a similar claimed miracle within its occult practices. So I see a correlation here of they have a fire that they claim has not been extinguished in like a millennia or longer. And then Christianity has a similar, or sect of Christianity has a similar miracle that they claim that takes place, I believe, during Epiphany or feasts, one of those where there's a fire that is continuously going. Is there any significance to that within Zoroastrianism with the fire? Because it reminds me of the
Yeah.
mythos of Prometheus and the continual fire there.
Yeah. You're talking a little earlier that there's a thought that Zoroastrian was monotheistic at some point in time, or at least uh, closer to the religion of Abraham. And even in the Quran, when they talk about Sabians, that's kind of who is being referenced is Zoroastrianisms, and they kind of include them in as people from amongst the book or a holy scripture that they would have once had. But they became corrupted into polytheism. So, from their perspective, and I'm not trying to, be speak for them, but it would suggest that we should see some monotheism within that, right?
Right.
Okay. So when we look at Zoroastrianism, one of their main important gods is Mithra.
Right.
And Mithra was the branch religion of Zoroastrianism in Rome at the time Christianity was rising and gets merged into um, much of Christianity with Constantine.
He was the bull deity, correct? That they sacrificed bulls to,
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
and they wore the white or the red caps, correct?
Yes. And considered almost like an Odin type of god, right? Like a
Papa
horn.
Smurf from the
Yeah.
Smurfs.
Yeah. Well, no, Odin is in the Norse, the horn
No,
god.
correct. Yes, sir.
Cernunnos, um, or Cern or Pan, um, and is a destroyer god like Shiva. But understand this is from the Persian versus the Avestan Persian versus the Sanskrit. Shiva would be more the equivalent. But Mitra has the same understanding as being a destroyer god with fire and incarnates in the end time into Lord Maitreya, which is a transliteration of Mitra
Oh wow.
as the Antichrist type figure, right? And when you look at Baphomet that the Templars worshipped. He's a goat god. He's a horn god, a pan god that all the knowledge comes from. He's a degraded goat god, like Azazel was originally seraphim, but is the scapegoat. As that Azazel Hebrew word comes up with the scapegoat that's sacrificed on the Day of Atonement, that we're not told what the sins are for. It's probably for the antediluvian world. And he's a destroyer god. He taught all the arts and crafts of war. So Bapho isn't the usual etymology that people will generally talk about on that. Um, and it's actually, if you look at French papa, it's sort of that's the informal of père for father. And Bapa or Bapo is also understood as papa, as a transliteration for the informal into French. And as you take that back into Indo-Aryan or into Sanskrit Aryan, Bapa means father as an informal way. So Baphomet is Father Mitra that they're worshiping. And also understanding as the source of all wisdom, just as Azazel was the one who provided the most wisdom. So when we're trying to understand the connection between Eastern religions and Western religions and end time prophecy as seen through the polytheist lens, we don't understand all of the allegories and double entendres that they're using all the way through. So now when we start to connect all of that, we go back to why the heck do we have satyr gods in Lewis's characters, Bacchus and Timus, when this is clearly going to be the one that is going to be the avatar from polytheist perspective with the coming Antichrist
It is insane when
as an incarnation.
well, and even the most basic one, like Baphomet, right? Like,
Yeah,
and his depiction in the mainstream media as a goat deity,
yeah,
and just not the, I don't know if it's just the inability for folks to look and see the origin of that, or to look and see the relationship with the satyr. Um, I think I mentioned last time we spoke about in Isaiah, in the Latin Vulgate, it translates it as the satyr and the screech owl. Um,
yep,
like, and that ties in with the theology of the region, correct?
mhm,
At the time when that prophecy was written, the Ugaritic peoples, correct? And that goes back to
yep,
what we're talking about.
yep,
So in that portion of the scripture, it's straight up referencing these two things that you just mentioned, these two deities, the male and the female deities,
yeah,
in the negative light. And that's the continual theme, right? The inversion of the male and the female.
yep,
The chief deities are always female or male
yep,
in these pantheons. Do you so with Baphomet, right? You said it literally turns out to mean like Papa Mithra or Father Mithra.
yeah,
So that kind of harkens back to the Odin, who he was called All Father or the All Father as well.
yep,
So you mentioned earlier superhero movies kind of transcend all of these mythical boundaries and bring it into the mainstream. Do you see that as a medium too for these false deities to streamline the process of bringing forth their
Almost
perceived
a
will?
modern version of the Tolkien or Lewis.
Well, it is for sure,
it
but
is. Yeah.
it's more eyes
What's it's to get us used to the idea of a superhuman and that they're going to be promising that because we get an evolution of that. It's like the next level of humanity, right?
Right.
Is kind of the allegory that's in there. And a connection here and back to the sacrifice that you were talking about at Christmas, the gods of the pantheon, no matter which aspect of the ruling ones, they're all considered bulls as well.
right.
There's and there's ones that actually have a bull's head, but um, all the gods were considered bulls, and their offspring were considered bulls as well. So when you get into like the creation of Gilgamesh in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he's going to have a mother goddess whose name is Nin, who's a fertility bull goddess, and father King Lugubanda is the proponent there. And Gilgamesh is called a wild bull. In the Ugaritic text, the gods are all called bulls, and so are their offspring. The Rephaim are called bulls. These are the bulls of Bashan.
That's what my next question was.
And
So,
they're the ones that are mocking Jesus on the cross.
and so when he says that, like, physically there weren't bulls running around him at Golgotha, but
Yeah.
he is speaking to the defeat of these spirits and to their bloodlines and the rulers in this world.
Well, they are, but those bloodlines and rulers, they're invisible. Nobody else can see them because they're in
Right.
spirit form there, right? And they're mocking him. Why? Because they believe they've won. And First Corinthians tells us that had they anticipated the resurrection, they wouldn't have had him crucified. But they're celebrating at this point. They're mocking him. And
It's
they
one of my
have no
favorite
idea.
scriptures that you've brought to light, that when you take the understanding that you've brought to the table for our faith and the study and the research that you have, that verse in First Corinthians that you just mentioned, where it says that Christ made a spectacle of them, it doesn't make sense without the context. It doesn't make
It
sense
doesn't.
without what you're saying.
Yeah, so like in the grave in First Peter 3, he's talking to these spirits who sinned at the time of the flood.
Right.
They're in prison, right? And it takes a bit of a story to tell the whole story here. And I always say, well, I'm speculating. He's basically telling them that, when I resurrect, that your resurrection is over. But if people want to piece that together, and I don't know whether we've covered this on past shows or not, but go to Colossians 2, where it's talking about rudiments or elementals, stoichian, and fallen angels like spoiled principalities and powers, and where Jesus um, triumphed over them. And in about verse 10, it talks about making a spectacle of these beings, right? And that's referencing Ephesians 4:8, where Jesus takes the captivity captives, which is a really bizarre term. Shows up two other times in the Bible, one in Judges 5:12, and it actually means prisoners in Judges 5:12, but also it's in where you get the full story. And what you learn in Ephesians 4:8 is he's quoting Psalms 68 directly of captivity captives. And what happens there is in the time of when Jesus is ascending, he is taking these prisoners to Mount Hermon, the bulls of Bashan, back to Bashan, back to the mountain of Bashan, and pronouncing judgment over them. That's the spectacle. And that's
Yes.
uh, the pronouncing of their sentence to going to the lake of fire. And that's already now sealed.
And it's so beautiful because Christ came to fulfill all things in the flesh so that they could be fulfilled in the spirit as well.
Yep.
So when he says with Peter, a lot of people take the behold, specifically Catholicism, behold, I build this church upon this rock, and the gates of hell shall not prevail.
Yeah.
Context again matters,
Yes.
because what he was saying, it was in front of that the temple to Pan. They're at
Yeah.
the base of that mountain range, and so he did it in the flesh. He pronounced the judgment, and then at the crucifixion, he did and the resurrection, he did what you just said. And so,
Yeah.
if you
And
don't
even
have
the gates of Hades won't overcome this church.
right,
He said that right at the base of Mount Hermon, right at the cave, which is known as the gate of Hades. This is the council of the gods of the Baalim council that's called Saphon in the Ugaritic text, and people would have you believe that's closer to Tyre on the Mediterranean River. Well, Saphon in the Semitic means north. Saphon in Hebrew means north. Bashan is the mountain of the north, Saphon, and it's called that several times. I won't go through all of it, but understand that's where the Council of the Gods is located too. That's where the assembly of the Titanu of the giants was located, where they received their authority to rule from the council of the gods.
And it's incredible because when you take a look at all of the origin stories, whether it's Shintoism in Japan or in Mesoamerica or in Greek mythology, there's always a mountain. There's
Yeah.
always
A high
there's
place.
there's always the high place they descend from, right? And it goes back to, gonna put a nice bow on it and bring it back to what we began with. Even in the beginning of Lewis's works, right? It's a high place because
Yep.
they go to a different realm. They go to this forest. They go to this
Well,
grove.
even to get to the wardrobe, they go. Was it in an attic? Isn't it?
Well,
It's
yes,
in the
but
attic.
the wardrobe's
Yep.
created from a tree,
In the movie, it's placed in like
right?
an attic, and so they even have
It
to go to
is.
a high place to get to the portal,
Yep.
But it was created from a tree that was from a different realm, essentially.
which makes sense.
Because the origin story is of the whole world of Narnia is in a grove with pools and looking pools into different realms and territories.
Yeah. And in polytheism, there's 7 holy mountains.
Right.
And probably 8 holy mountains, probably 7 ones around the world for the 7 wandering stars, and then where Satan sits, where the Council of Gods is located at. And that same 7 would have, in the understanding, a gateway to Hades and a portal.
So I've heard people say in a modern sense, in Revelation, Jesus says he knows where Satan's seat is in Pergium.
Yeah.
Throughout history, we see, the museum in Berlin took piece of Pergium before Hitler was born. His stage was modeled, etc. Do you, where would you put as the mountain or the seat of the fallen one, Satan, today? I've heard people speculate that it was in Denver because of because of multiple reasons.
So I could say because the Broncos.
No,
Yeah.
but because of Denver.
I would still put it back at Mount Hermon.
I would too. I've heard a lot of weird speculation about
Yeah.
his seat
Yeah.
current residing.
Well, but again, we have to be careful in terms of how we understand polytheism and how the Bible gives us information about them. So every seat is a throne, right? Because it's a counterfeiting of the throne of God and the mountain of God where his assembly is, right? And so each of the 7 are going to have their own seat and mountain. And then if there's any other additional kingdoms offshoot of that as the world expands and populates, there's going to be another seat. But to keep it simple, there's 7 and there's probably the 8th because you get 7 and 8 as an important number in polytheism, and Satan would sit above the council of the gods. I would say that you would have 7 plus Satan's seat. And I would also look towards um, something to do with Rome as well, in terms of how this all sort of fits in with their septimonium of 7 hills,
Uh,
which is kind of a representation of the 7 holy mountains. And that's likely going to be the seat of idolatry in the end time until Babylon is destroyed and it's established in Jerusalem. So, yeah, we should be very well aware of that. High places are just normal places of worship, but then there's a hierarchy of high places.
right.
And each nation, even though it may be seated by another kingdom, is going to have their holy mountain as well.
So for our countries, because we're in 2 different countries, but
Yep.
we were seeded by another nation, so to speak, do you have an idea or a presumption of in our countries what they are?
No, I really don't. It's because you wonder whether or not it's going back to a connection back to Great Britain,
Right.
right? Or is it going back to the mountain that the First Nations sort of worship? Even though they may have multiple of those, what was that original one? So it's hard to know. Um,
Well, like in our country, originally DC was called Rome before it became known as DC.
Mount
District of Columbia.
Rushmore. Mount Rushmore was a place of worship for the Native Americans too.
Yes.
Six fathers.
Yeah, and there's the Bighorn Mountains in Texas. Same thing, was a place of worship. Um, so DC is one though, and it's a city on a hill. And that's kind of in your face that it's a high place. But do you think that in America it's easier to identify than in Canada?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's so many mountains. I mean, there's so many mountains in both countries and different mountain ranges. So I can't point to one that, would make sense to me in Canada as that mountain. But again, it could be one that includes Canada and the US.
That's what I was about to ask next.
Right.
Was
So
this
it could be in the US. I mean, could be Canada, but I can't point to anything that I would even throw in there.
Have you ever been to Denver? Because it's up there on the list for for
Yeah,
options.
well, certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
So I know we're running low on time, and I just had like a two-part question for you, Gary.
Sure.
So our government's been really pushing the age of disclosure and UFOs and aliens. And so I was kind of curious, do you think that is pushing the agenda, the same agenda that these polytheists have been pushing for years, or is it legit? And then my second question is, do you think the gray aliens are a physical being, and are they descended from the Nephilim as well, or are they something else out of that creation?
Yeah, they're a Nephilim-like creation. They're part of the elementals that I talked about in Galatians 4. You can see actual elementals. It's used like in Colossians 2 with those two, with the rudiments, same Greek word stoichian, and they enslave us in this earth. And so in the occult, there's four groups of elementals. One's a large being that's taller than a human, is reptilian, it's a salamander. And then you have three groups of fairy groups. Within that, you have the ugly ones that we were talking about earlier, where the gnomes are um, grouped in, along with the trolls and the hobbits and elves, and so there's a group in there with the gnomes that um, they are little people and they have UAPs, UFOs as we would recognize them. They come through fairy portals, fairy domens. They kidnap people. They do sexual experimentation on them. The description of their kidnappings of people and their descriptions of their flying machines, of how they're described, are identical to, and they're called the gray gnomes or the gray fairies, the gray neighbors, but all grays, and they're identical to the gray aliens. What we look at in terms of polytheism is all of these different groups, and there's many under each of those groups. So, you're going to have good-looking ones like nymphs, for example, and a whole list of ones that are in there. Or you have leprechauns, which are part of the mischievous ones in the Menuet, and have these groups all over the world. But they're all created from the gods as well. Now, there might be something else going on there because they're small. So there might be some DNA manipulation going in there. And a lot of these elementals have changeling capability as well, as it seems to go with the elementals. So do I think the Greys are a physical little spindly being? Yes, I do. And there are fairy stories of these abductions all throughout our history. I put two in book one. And if you don't know the difference, then between a fairy and a gray alien, there isn't, because they are the same.
One, I have a lot of Native American mythologies that I've dealt quite heavily into, and origin stories, and all of them speak to their own as well with the little people, and they have different classes of little people as well.
Same three groups of little ones.
Right.
So do you think our government pushing this disclosure is to prime us for something?
Well, they're moving us into a direction, and everything that's happening is trying to get us to this nexus point, right? Whether or not it's the time when you have to disclose fully what they have at Antarctica, whether or not it is the pushing of doubling down on AI, to get it to a level where they can get to the technology and the implant system that the Davos crew wanted. That's why not this year, but last year, everybody was sent back with marching orders to create faster, better AI. The problem is all of these things that they're trying to do to get to this point where they're going to do and say whatever they're going to say, there's issues, there's obstacles. And in this case with the AI, with the latter, is they don't have enough electricity and it takes huge amounts of water to cool it. And so the only way to do that is you're going to have to build nuclear plants or you're going to have to cut power off from humans because we're the competition for it. And in the meantime, they're trying to get us all over to electricity on everything. And yet they know they don't have enough electricity, and the AI advancement's going to stall sometime this year
Oh, yeah.
because they won't be able to power it.
Morse theory. Well, Gary, I am always, it's always a plethora of information I feel like I have to chew on too. I've read your book now and I'm still working on the second one, but it's just, I'm always admirable of the years of your life that you have put towards this. And if nobody's thanked you for it, we want to make sure that you know that we are very appreciative of it, because for me, you have been a huge catalyst in our faith in the modern time, for those of us who are aware of you, to kind of go against the mold, to give us the background, the source material, to say, hey, no, we might know these things aren't correct, and that's a little Gnosticism creeping in, but you've really helped for us who don't have the shovels to dig. You've done a lot of the digging for us, and that's something that the body of Christ has a huge admirable debt to you, and I know that God has placed that calling on you for this reason, but
Well, I
uh,
appreciate that. And, when I started to talk a number of years ago about Tolkien and Lewis, I was thinking about what would be one of the easiest things to put on the table to get to people to think about how this world really works. And I thought that would be a classic example of what I wasn't understanding fully, and I needed to learn like several times over, because it's you see it in all sorts of different aspects. Is that people don't want to always know,
Yeah.
there's a
and
burden.
they're not going to change their mind no matter how much evidence you can present or how much scripture you can present. It doesn't matter. They're not going to move off of that. But what I also learned was it does resonate through to some, and hopefully more than I'm aware of. And all I'm trying to do with my research and when I go on shows is to try and make more sense to people of how this world works and how we can better understand it and to provide information on things, whether or not people like the information or not. I get why, because I went through a lot of this cognizant dissonance on the way myself. I mean, I get it. But once you know how the world works, it's becomes simpler
Mhm.
and you can understand things better. It doesn't mean you're not going to be frustrated. So it's part of, it's all part of the mix of what I try and do, because everything as a contrarian that I do, and I'm not trying to be a contrarian, it's just my research puts me into that position. I'm just trying to communicate to people, here's some information and do with it what you want. But make sure you understand why you believe what you believe and be sure of who you believe is talking to you and what are they all about. And so what I try and do is I try to be as consistent as possible, and I keep putting out things in more ways and hopefully sort of getting through the preparation. But it's an amazing, I have to say amazing, astonishing, unfortunately, how well the world has been prepared to reject the word of God, even
Absolutely.
Christians, that they will believe what the wisdom of the world says over what the Bible says. That's how well they've been prepared.
I have one final question for you this evening. When you were a child, how old were you when you realized, or have you always known, that the myths, what was presented as myths, the the lore, that stuff was real? About how old were you?
I understood it, even though I wouldn't talked to people about it, but I was convinced I was watching history.
Hmm.
I was reading history,
Same.
and that even though it wasn't presented to me in its full, vivid view, because that probably would have scared the the socks off of me too
Oh
much.
yeah.
Because you look at, Hercules. Okay,
Yep.
so what's this guy all about? Well, how is he the offspring of a god?
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't explained to me that he was a giant, right? But I kind of thought this can't be all just creative writing. This is and when you see so much of it, you say, okay, well, I get it. I saw this, I saw that over there. I could see the patterns when I was young, but I didn't put any of that all together. And in fact, when I started on my, you know, path back to Christ, and I was trying to research the Bible to see whether Hal Lindsey was lying on everything on his prophecies or accurate or out of context or whatever. And I had to go and read into the Bible. I mean, when I got to Genesis 6 and I read about the giants, even though I had read all of this stuff, I just said, whatever that is, that's not what I'm here for. And I don't want to be part of that. It's that cognizant dissonance. Because now it's saying, but that's the same story as Zeus and Alcmene and Hercules.
Yep.
But I'm saying, no, I'm here about prophecy. I don't want anything to do with that. But the more I researched the Bible, the more I saw these giants. And then I said, okay, I already know this. But still, I didn't want to deal with it. So when I started to write book one, it wasn't going to have anything about mythology or other cultures in there. And I got the first 10 chapters done pretty quick to try and connect Genesis 6 with Revelation is what the thought was what I was going to do. But then I just couldn't resist. I know this is the same story. I need to put a little bit in about the Greek and the Sumerian cultures. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. So,
Well, we're
but the
thankful for that snowball.
yeah, but the simple answer is yeah, I did not I was not convinced that these were made up characters. I mean, how could people I mean, I was thinking like, so these great authors like Hesiod and Homer,
They just
they're
made it up.
historians. Yeah, they just
There's
made it up because they're historians.
or Pliny the Elder,
Yeah,
like, come on.
yeah. How is that? But people accept that, right? Because well, that can't be true. That's just too crazy.
Well, Gary, I'm glad that you've always had that child's heart in that regard and that belief because I think the body of Christ is very much stronger for it. And that through your perseverance, you've presented a work of data that will outlive you by a
And
long time and us because
we appreciate you greatly because I mean, I can tell that you're a legit person because you can see your fruit.
yeah, you
You know,
can.
you're willing to come on our show repeatedly, and you're not really gaining anything from it. You're just giving, and I think that's a real test of character.
I think it's a real test of faith too
And
because
it's not just us. You do it with lots of different shows.
and I think that it speaks to your desire to serve too. And so we are very
Yeah, we
appreciative.
just want to give you your flowers because
Yeah, we don't have them,
Oh,
but we'll send them
you're
to
a
the
good
house.
dude, man.
well,
We like you.
Yeah.
well, we thank you for that. And so, and just like when we're talking about, and I'll close on this, is when we're talking about Tolkien and Lewis, is you decide as a person out there. If you think that that's Christian writing, or well, you can decide whatever you want to decide. If you think that's a Christian writing about polytheist things, that's okay. That's up to you. I'm only there to say, here's what they wrote, here's what they said. And when you call the Bible a fairy tale, and the fairy tale has a eucatastrophe in it, and that's the Gnostic belief system with Jesus not dying on the cross, you don't have to connect a lot of dots. But everybody is free to believe what they want to believe.
And with that,
Well, you have your book's coming out April 1st. Remind me of the name.
It's called the El Primo Conspiracy, AI's Covenant with Babylon, and it's to try and get people involved with how the world is looking today as we look into how the end time is likely to come about. And it's done through with my research for the people and the characters and my eschatology and my chronology.
Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on afterwards to give a raving review and to dive into it a little bit more after we have a chance to read it. But on the topic of choice, we want to remind everybody that this is the day of your choice, that if you have not accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior, that there is no better day than this time and now. And so you're not promised another minute. You're not promised the rest of this hour. So choose this day whom you will serve. But as for us in our house, we shall serve the risen King, Jesus Christ.
All right,
Amen.
everybody, go pre-order Gary's book, Amazon, at his website. And if people want more of the information on Tolkien, they can email you.
Yes, just be very patient.
Yeah, so if you guys want the receipts, Gary has the receipts. Just be patient.
And if anybody, you can email them to us, Gary. And if anybody wants them, they can always reach out to us too, and we can forward them on.
I'll do that.
Fine.
That's the easiest way of probably getting it out to your audience. A lot faster that way. So,
Perfect.
and the reason why I did the documents is I do like to document things, but I just thought that if I was going to talk about them, I should have things that people could look at.
Receipts.
And so it's a 6-part series.
Well, all right, everybody. That's the episode for today. Gary Wayne, everybody.